In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I like to weave in my ends. There are lots of different ways to do this. Lots of different designers and crocheters and makers do this in many different ways. This is just how I like to weave in my ends. First, I really love these bent tip needles. They're from Clover. I can link them down below for you. This is just a little swatch that I made. It's worth worsted weight yarn, and then this was my hook I used for that project. But all you're gonna need is, I guess, a swatch with some ends to weave in, scissors, and your needle. So I'm just gonna start with my first end here at the bottom. Make my end a little bit shorter so I don't have a super long one to work with. I'm gonna put my end, thread my end through my needle. And I already have a knot here at the bottom from the starting of my chain, so I'm really not going to knot it again. I do like to find a side that has an easy to see places for me to weave in. So I'm just going to insert my hook evenly through the ends, through the back of these stitches. And I usually do, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 stitches or so at a time. I'm going to pull it through nice and easy. I don't want it to be too tight because I don't want to pull my project. See, if I make it really tight, I'm going to pull on my project, and I don't want that. So I do pull on it to make sure the whole entire end is through, and then I like to loosen it a bit and make sure it's still stretchy. I'm not making any holes. And then I'm going to go back the other way. Make sure not to go in the same stitch you ended in, because then you're just going to be undoing everything you just did. So you could either go up a row, sometimes if it's the same color, I'll go up a row and I'll work back through these stitches all the way back. I'm going to pull it through as tight as I can without pulling too tight. See how that kind of makes your project tight? It creates kind of a hole there. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to loosen that back up just by pulling and tugging. I'm going to actually do that a couple more times. I'm going to go back through here. I'm going to skip this first loop because that's where I came out of, and I don't want to put my needle back there because now I'm just going to undo what I just did. So I'm going to go in this loop. I'm going to work back again. Sometimes it gets a little tight if you already worked through that space. If it is, then you can just use another row. I'm going to pull it as tight as I can without pulling on my project. Just a nice even tension all the way across. I'm going to go back one more time. I came out of this loop, so I'm going to insert my needle into this loop. There we go. That's good. So I did it about 4 times. I went back and forth. So there's that end. I'm going to snip that. And I'm just gonna, I kind of just tug and pull on it just to hide it as best as I can. So for that row, I wove in my ends on this side. For this one, I'm going to do it on the opposite side just to kind of even it out. Now this depends on the project you're doing. If I'm doing a scarf, then I will kind of alternate which side my ends are on, so there's not an obvious front or back, because with scarves, both sides are the right side. When I'm doing a sweater, I do make sure that all of my ends are woven in on the inside of my sweater. I do it all on one side and make sure that all of those are going to end up on the inside of my sweater. But for these purposes, I'm going to alternate so that there's not an obvious right or wrong side. Here I have 2 strands of the same color. I like to make things as easy as I possibly can for myself. So I'm going to tie a little knot right here. I'm actually going to do it twice because I like to be extra secure. And I'm going to weave both these in at the same time. First, I'm going to trim, because these are different lengths. I want them both to be the same length. So I'm going to trim that so that both of these ends are the same length. I'm going to thread them through my needle. And I'm going to weave them in. So I'm going to insert my needle in the back of these loops. Again, like 5, 6, 7 stitches. I'm gonna pull it through. Again, I'm gonna pull it as tight as I can without pulling my project. Make sure both, if you're doing 2 ends at the same time, make sure that they're both pulled through evenly. And then I'm gonna go back through. You can hear it's getting a little tight. Okay, there I have a little bit of a bump. I don't know if you can see it too well, but I'm gonna pull these a little bit tighter. There we go. I'm gonna go through one more time. Just a few stitches and pull it through. Oops. Because I don't want it to get too bulky here, especially when you're doing 2 at the same time. Of course, you don't have to do both at the same time. You could do 1 at a time and separate them. Definitely, you could do it that way. I just like to make it a little less work. So there's our end. I have a little bit of that end poking out, but that's okay because I'm gonna stretch it a little more and then it'll hide it for me. Okay. Then we have these ends that are kind of in the middle of our project. So I'm gonna weave each of them in individually. I'm gonna put my yarn on my needle. And you know, this is kind of a long end for me to weave in right now because I don't have that much space. I'm gonna trim that a bit. I don't need to weave in that entire end. I wanna make sure I have enough to comfortably weave it in, but I don't wanna be pulling and pulling and pulling my yarn through. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do, I wanna make sure that this is tight because this is where there was a color change. So I am going to insert it here and I'm gonna make a little knot. I know I've seen tutorials and a lot of people don't like to make knots. I personally do because I like to make sure that it's secure. So I just make a little knot. And when I weave it in, I'm only going to weave it in on this purple because I don't want the purple to show through where I wove it in on the green. So I'm just going to keep it right here. I like to make sure when I'm weaving in my ends that I'm weaving it in with a color that matches. Because otherwise it's going to show through and we definitely don't want that. So again, I'm going to pull it as tight as I can without pulling on my project. And I'm going to take it back. I'm going to go one more time through here. I came out of this loop, so I'm going to insert in the next one over. So I'm not undoing what I just did. There we go. You know, 3 or 4 times passing through is definitely enough. I'm going to trim that. Okay. And now I'm going to do this one right here. And this is a good size. I don't need to trim this end. I kept it a reasonable length. So again, I'm going to make a little knot. And I'm actually going, if I can grab it, there we go. And I'm actually going to weave in this end on the other side because this is getting a little bulky back here. And because with this particular project, I'm not going to have a front or back, I'm going to weave it in on this side. So I'm going to go through just kind of the front loops of the stitches. Pull it through without pulling too tight. Go back once more. There we go. And then I'm going to trim that. Then it looks like I have one more end to weave in on the end of my project, my last row. So I'm going to thread it through my needle. I have a knot already because it was the end of my row, so I had made a knot when I stopped. This one is a little long for me. I don't like working with super long ends because I feel like I'm just pulling and pulling my yarn through and it's just not necessary. So I'm going to weave it in. I'm going to start by going through the front loops of this last row. And just 3 or 4, 5, 6 stitches, whatever works. And then I'm going to pull it so that it's not super tight. And I came out of this loop, so I'm going to go in the next one over and work it back. If I can get it in there, there we go. And I like to pull it nice and slow because I don't want to pull my project tight. So pull it slow so you get a good tension on your ends weaving in. All right. I'm going to do one more time. And I do constantly kind of pull on my project, tug on it, just to make sure the tension on my ends is nice and even. The worst thing is to finish a project and realize you've woven your ends way too tight and you created these holes or places where it's gathered. Here we go. All right, so we wove in all of our ends on our piece. We wove them back and forth a few times. They're really not coming out. So I hope you found this tutorial useful.